Neil Armstrong gave himself a 50-50 chance of making it back alive. He went anyway. This is the story of what happens when you commit before you are ready.
Welcome to History I Just Learned, the husband and wife duo learning about history as we go and discovering the human lessons behind it. My name is Zaira.
And I'm Sergio. Sweetie, I'll be honest with you and also with everybody else. You already know my song. I don't know why I'm saying that to you. But to everyone that's listening, there is something particular about me. And I think every man might relate to that. It is the fact that I always come up to you with these ideas, usually very crazy, but great ideas in some respect because I want to provide better for the family. I want us to
Yes.
have a better financial standing for me, for you, and the girls. And I quit them. I quit those ideas. Not because I stopped caring about them, but because at some point when I noticed like the gap between where I am and where I want to be just feels like too much. And I just simply walk away. But this podcast, I just want to say this podcast is completely different. But I'm not gonna pretend it is easy because we are now in a closet and this closet is very small.
Super small.
We barely fit in here. And we have to record really late at night while the kids are sleeping because it's the only time that we have some quiet time. And you and I, Saida, we're building this around two girls. And you know what that is? Full schedules and a lot of limitations that comes with that. What sometimes comes to my mind, or at least in the past, was this question. What happens if this doesn't work? What if we put all this energy and it goes nowhere? What if I'm not the person who can pull it off? But I keep showing up because there is this one question that I wrote in a board that I'm gonna tell you guys later about. What about you, sweetie?
Well, you know my stories are not as dramatic as yours. But for me, it was more when I was 22 of a car. And once I bought the car, I realized that what I have done. So for the month that I bought the car was parked outside my house. Nobody touched it. Nobody was driving it. I wasn't driving it because in my head I'm like, I can drive this thing. I don't know how to drive. And I remember this conversation that I had with my stepdad. He came up to me. He was like, "So when are you gonna drive?" And I was like, "What do you mean? Like I'm learning." And he was like, "Yeah, but the car has been parked there for a month. You should just go outside and start driving the car." And I'm like, "No, because I could hurt somebody." He was like, "You're not going to hurt anybody. You know what you're doing." And I was like, "No, I don't." He's like, "You do." So that little conversation that pushed me to just go and drive the car. You're not going to learn if you don't drive it. So then little by little, I started, going around my complex until I was able, to make it out of the complex. And that conversation got me where I am right now. The really reckless driver that I am. Responsibly, responsibly.
A
but it was
professional reckless
but
driver.
it was one of those things where you get yourself into something that you're just like before you even prepare.
How about you guys? Have you struggled with something like this before? I don't think we are alone in this. There is something most people have in common: a project, a dream, a business idea that never made it past the starting line. Not because of failure, because of the fear of it. We talked ourselves out of it before anything had a chance to start. And here's what's interesting: we usually do it before anything has actually gone wrong. We quit in our heads first. We run the math on failure before we've even started building. Kennedy's team hadn't lost a single mission when he stood up in front of Congress in 1961. There was no evidence yet that this was impossible, but there was also no evidence that it was possible. He still made the commitment. And what happened over the next 8 years, the people it set in motion, the problems it forced them to solve, the cost it extracted, is one of the most remarkable stories in human history. They did not wait until they knew how. It is 1957. The United States, the most powerful nation on earth, is losing a race to the Soviet Union. And not just any race. October 4th, 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, a metal ball the size of a beach ball, circling the Earth every 96 minutes, broadcasting a steady radio beep that anyone with the right equipment can pick up from the ground. It is the first man made object ever to orbit the Earth, and it is not American. The country goes into something close to panic. If the Soviets can put a satellite in orbit, they can put a nuclear warhead there too. The sky is not longer safe. The sky belongs to someone else. 4 years later, it gets worse. April 12, 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin becomes the first human being in space. He orbits the Earth. He comes home safely. The Soviet Union has now put both the first satellite and the first man into space. America is behind, publicly, embarrassingly behind. 3 weeks after Gagarin's first flight, NASA sent Alan Shepard into space for 15 minutes on a rocket that goes straight up and comes straight back down. It's not an orbit, it's a hub. The gap between the two nations is real, and the world is paying attention. On May 25th, 1961, just weeks after Shepard's flight, President John F. Kennedy stands before a joint session of Congress and says something that stops the room. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before the decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. Consider that for a moment. The United States has put a man in space for 50 minutes. 1. The technology to go to the moon does not exist yet. The rockets, the spacesuits, the computers, none of it exists. Two spacecraft have never docked together. No human has ever walked in space. And no one has any idea how to land on the moon and get back off it. And the president just told the world, we will do all of that in less than 9 years. Later, Kennedy is asked privately whether he really believed it could be done. He admits he is not sure, but he understood something that the engineers and scientists in the room perhaps did not yet. The goal itself is the engine. You commit first, then you figure it out later. Over the next 8 years, 400,000 Americans go to work on the Apollo program. Engineers, mathematicians, mechanics, tailors, electricians, physicists. Most of them are not famous. Most of them will never be famous. They work in factories, in laboratories, and computer rooms across the country, building something that has never been built before, solving problems that had never been solved before, for a deadline that no one is entirely sure can be met. At MIT, a young mathematician named Margaret Hamilton is put in charge of developing the onboard flight software for the Apollo missions. She is 32 years old. She is one of the only women in the building, and she's writing code for computers that have less processing power than the phone in your pocket today. The Apollo guidance computer has roughly 72 kilobytes of memory. A single photograph on your phone is larger than that. Hamilton and her team have to build software that works perfectly the first time because there is no sending updates to a spacecraft on its way to the moon. Every line of code has to be right. Every possible error condition has to be anticipated. Every failure mode has to have a response built in before it happens. One day, her young daughter is playing in the lab and accidentally triggers a command that causes the computer simulation to crash. Hamilton wants to write a line of code that will prevent that specific error from happening on the real mission. Her supervisors tell her not to bother. Astronauts are professionals. They would never make that kind of mistake. Hamilton still writes the code. In Houston, a mathematician named Katherine Johnson is doing the calculations that nobody else can do, trajectory calculations. The math of getting a spacecraft from the Earth to the moon and back, accounting for gravity, velocity, orbital mechanics, the rotation of the Earth, the position of the moon. All of it computed by hand before the computers are fast enough to be trusted. When John Glenn is about to become the first American to orbit the Earth in 1962, he refuses to fly until Katherine Johnson personally verifies the computer's numbers. He trusts her more than the machine. If she verifies them, he flies. She will spend years doing the math for missions she will never receive public credit for. Her name will not appear in most history books for decades. These are two of the 400,000, and they represent something important, that the moon landing is not the story of the three astronauts in a rocket. It is the story of a nation decided to do something and then put 400,000 people to work figuring out how. For 8 years, they built. And then, January 27th, 1967, everything almost ends. Launch Complex 34, Cape Kennedy, Florida, January 27th, 1967. Astronaut Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee are sealed inside the Apollo 1 command module for a routine ground test. Not a launch, just a rehearsal. The rocket has no fuel. It is not considered dangerous. Before leaving home, Gus Grissom picks up a lemon from his backyard tree. He brought it to the launch site and hung it on a training machine. It was his way of telling everyone the truth. He believed the spacecraft was junk. He felt it was poorly built, full of ignored problems, and above all, unsafe. The morning of the test, the crew notices a strange odor in the oxygen supply. It takes an hour to deal with it. Then, the communications system starts cutting out. Grissom gets on the radio and says, "How are we going to get to the moon if we can talk between two or three buildings?" At 6:31 in the evening, one word comes through inside the castle: fire. The command module is pressurized with pure oxygen, an atmosphere that burns like gasoline in the presence of a spark. A freight wire near Grissom's seat produces that spark. In less than 30 seconds, the cabin is an inferno. The hatch door opens inward. Under the increased pressure from the fire, it is impossible to open from the inside. Ed White tries anyway. The investigators later find he had made part of a full turn with the ratchet before the smoke took him. Technicians on the outside try to reach them. The heat and the smoke drives them back repeatedly. By the time they get the hatch open, 5 minutes after the first word, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee are gone. All three killed by asphyxiation. The Apollo program goes silent. Congress holds hearings. The country asks whether this is worth it, whether Kennedy's deadline is worth three lives, whether the whole thing should be shut down. NASA spent 18 months redesigning the spacecraft from the ground up. New hatch, new materials, new wiring, new everything. Over 1,000 changes made to the command module before anyone flies again. And then they fly again. Grissom had said once, after his Gemini mission, when a reporter asked him about the risk of a space flight, "If we die, we want people to accept it. We are in a risky business, and we hope that if anything happens to us, it will not delay the program. The conquest of space is worth the risk of life." July 16, 1969, Kennedy Space Center, Florida. The rocket stands as tall as a 36-story building on the launch pad. It weighed 6 million pounds. It is the most powerful machine human beings have ever built. And at 9:32 in the morning, it lights up. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins are on top of it. 1 million people line the roads and beaches around the Cape to watch. Another 650 million watch on television around the world. Armstrong ever understated radio's back. "This ride was magnificent. It was beautiful." 3 days later, they are circling the moon. The Earth is 238,000 miles behind them. The moon is right there. On the morning of July 20th, Armstrong and Aldrin crawl through the tunnel in the landing craft, the Eagle. Collins stays behind in the mothership, Columbia. He will circle the moon alone for the next 24 hours, out of radio contact with Earth every time he passes behind the moon, waiting. The Eagle separates from Columbia. Collins watches them go. The final drop begins. 5 minutes into the descent, 6,000 feet above the surface of the moon, a warning alarm goes off on the computer. System overload. Armstrong calls it immediately. In mission control, the director turns to his computer expert, a 26-year-old named Steve Bales, and demands to know if they are safe. Bales has seconds to confirm. The Eagle is dropping toward the moon at speed. If they do not get a go signal, they have to cancel the landing and go home. The alarm means the computer is being flooded with too much data. It is struggling to keep up, but it is protecting the most important task because the team built it to do exactly that. But no one in mission control has seen this happen during a real mission before. Bales makes a call. Go. The mission continues. The alarm goes off again at 3,000 feet, again at 1,600 feet, and every time the answer is the same. Go. Keep flying. At 500 feet, Armstrong looks out the window and realizes that they have a problem. The automatic pilot is taking them directly into a crater the size of a football field, surrounded by boulders as big as cars. He cannot land there. He takes manual control. He is now flying the ship himself, searching for a flat patch of ground on a moon he has never been to, in a vehicle that has never landed anywhere, with the fuel running out beneath him. In mission control, the radio operator calls out 60 seconds. 60 seconds of fuel remaining. Armstrong flies, looking, searching, the ground moving beneath him. 30 seconds. He finds a patch. He brings the Eagle down. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Eastern Time, a contact light blinks on in the cockpit. The landing legs touch the surface of the moon. Aldrin calls it out. Contact light, engine stop. And then Armstrong's voice, steady and quiet, comes across 238,000 miles of space. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. In mission control, the radio operator tries to respond and can barely get words out. He says, Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. They have been holding their breath, all of them, 400,000 people who built this thing, and now it is on the moon. 6 hours later, at 2:56 in the morning on July 21st, Neil Armstrong climbs down the ladder, passes on the last step, and steps onto the surface of the moon. 650 million people are watching on television, more human beings than have ever watched a single event in history. He says, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. They spent 2.5 hours on the surface. Armstrong and Aldrin plant a flag. They collect rock samples. They set up scientific instruments and take photographs. And then they lift off. Dock with Collins in Colombia. Begin the 3-day journey home. Splash down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24th. 8 days total, from launch to splashdown. The world celebrates. Ticker tape parades in New York and Chicago. 6 million people lining the streets. A state dinner in Los Angeles attended by members of Congress. 44 governors and ambassadors from 83 nations. Nixon calls it the greatest week in the history of the world since the creation. But I want to stay with something smaller than all of that. I want to stay with Kennedy's challenge in 1961. He stands up in front of Congress and makes a commitment that no one, including him, is fully certain can be kept. He does not wait for the technology to exist. He does not wait for a plan. He decides first, And the decision itself becomes the force that pulls 400,000 people into motion for 8 years. Margaret Hamilton writes computer code that seems unnecessary to others because she sees a failure that might happen and decides to prevent it. That code saves the mission on July 20th, 1969. Katherine Johnson does math no computer is trusted to do, and John Glenn trusts his life to her numbers before he trusts the machine. Gus Grissom and Ed White and Roger Chaffee gave their life on that launch pad, and NASA did not let it be in vain. They rebuilt the spacecraft from scratch and they flew it to the moon and back. None of these people knew for certain it would work. Kennedy did not know, neither did Hamilton. Armstrong did not know. He estimated a 50-50 chance of making it back alive. They committed their life to the pursuit of the impossible, fully, without a guaranteed outcome. And on July 20th, 1969, at 4:17 in the afternoon, a human being from planet Earth steps on another world for the first time in history. That steps belongs to Armstrong, but the ceiling he broke belongs to everyone who came after. Every astronaut who has flown since, every engineer who looked at that moment and decided the impossible was worth attempting, every kid who looked up at the moon after July 1969 and thought, we went there, we actually went there, now has a challenge. What was impossible on July 19th became history on July 20th because they refused to stop. Sweetie, when you first heard the Kennedy speech, or at least the commitment that he made in 1961, before any of this technology existed, what went through your mind?
That he was crazy. Because think about this. In order for this to happen, it's a first time thing. A human, a person, has to be flown into space to accomplish this. And if we learn something about history, usually, not always, but usually, the very first time of trying something new, you have a higher chance for it to go wrong. Very, very wrong. So he's putting someone's life at stake just to be able to accomplish this.
For me, I think it's a great pressure on him as a president. He has to beat the Soviets. And for us, it may seem trivial, but it was about the reputation of a whole nation. And also, it was the idea of confirming capitalism is the better world system. And I think the pressure of having that great legacy as a nation dared him to make such a bold proclamation.
Yes.
Maybe if he didn't dare as much, he would have signaled the world that communism was the better option. And we wouldn't be in the prosperous countries that we are today.
Yes.
But you know, of all the people in this story, Kennedy, Hamilton, Johnson, the astronauts, who stood out to you the most and why?
Oh, to me, it was John Glenn and Katherine Johnson. The amount of trust that he had in her over a computer, over technology, it tells you how smart she was. And it wasn't that she was doing basic math. Like, she was doing math to go to the moon. Like, no one has gone to the moon, like, he was trusting her with that. So, she kind of stood out to me because of that.
Yeah, for me, it was Hamilton, the software engineer. These people were incredibly smart.
Yes.
And if you consider all the complexity, which I have no idea how to do any of this, but if you consider all the work that she has to put in to develop that kind of software to go to the moon, come back for the first time, I also think about the passion that she has because she went above and beyond to do her work, her responsibility. But she went beyond that because she makes sure to have a safe plan in motion in case of failure. But speaking of failure, you have the Apollo 1 fire. You have 3 men that died, and NASA rebuilds. Is that inspiring to you, or does that make you feel uncomfortable?
Okay, first, it was uncomfortable. Because if you think about the greatest things that humans have invented, like the car, airplane, in this case, the spaceship, usually a life has to be lost in order for the invention to be better. Something can happen with the engine, and then someone dies, and then you have to fix it and figure out how can you make it better so the next person doesn't die. And also, I find it inspiring because choosing to keep going after an accident like that makes you think about how all these things that we have right now came to be. Like, someone had to overcome a tragedy of an airplane on a car crash in order to be like, okay, we need to do this better in order for the next generations to be safe and to have, better quality stuff than what we have now.
For me, it's only one thing. I am inspired by the resilience of the people at NASA. Because after such catastrophic error, everyone will turn on you. And the whole country is going to aim for your head.
Yes.
And the determination to keep going, to improve in the midst of tremendous backlash is inspiring. Also, the fact that these men knew the risk and they were like, let's do it. For example, you remember Grimson?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
He died and he wanted people to keep going because they know the risk. And he said that the conquest of space is worth risking your life.
That's really inspiring.
That's why I'm like, it's incredible. For example, you have Armstrong that estimated a 50-50 chance of making it back alive.
Those people are brave. Because if there's a 50-50 chance on my life, I wouldn't do it.
But he went anyway. What does that tell you about the relationship between commitment and fear?
To me, fear is part of the commitment. Fear is a natural response to the unknown. But deciding to keep on going despite of it is what determines how committed we are.
For me, the greatness of this man, just like you, was not defined by the accomplishment. And that was a miracle. Going to the moon and back is amazing. But their commitment in the face of possible death. It's not like I'm gonna lose a limb, no, of death. Buzz Aldrin, you have Armstrong, Collins. They already have colleagues that die before them.
I think about this sometimes when I feel like, oh my God, I wish I could go to the moon. And then I think about these people that have died because I was like, yeah, I think I'm better here.
For me, the greatness of this man is not defined exactly by their accomplishment. It was a miracle for sure, but their commitment in the face of possible death is what's great to me. They know other people that died in agonizing death going through this mission and they still focused on it. And I'm pretty sure these people were afraid, but they kept going.
I will be.
And that is the remarkable trait. And I think that's why history remembered their name.
Because they dare to do it.
Yeah. So, but what do you think stops people now that we're talking about fear, commitment, and all that? What do you think stops people from committing to something before they have all the answers?
I think it's the fear of not knowing. Not all people risk or take a risk if they don't know what's going to happen after. We usually go for the safer option where we know the outcome. But when it's something that we don't know what's going to happen or how things are going to turn out, it's hard to take those risks. And I feel that fear plays a big part on whether or not we take the step forward.
I believe it's rational to be afraid of the unknown, but courage is the most valuable when everything in your body and your mind is screaming for you to stop. So, courage is the most meaningful when being tested. And we saw in this story that the commitment came first and the answers came after. Do you think that order, deciding first and figuring it out later, actually works in real life?
I think it depends on the situation, but most of the time, that's something that helps people stay committed. Like us, we decided to do the podcast without knowing what was going to happen, and here we are learning as we go.
In this closet.
Yes.
And it seems counterintuitive. Like trying to do it first and then figuring it out, it's definitely going against what's considered normal, at least in your brain. But once that's there, giving the next step, giving the steps that follow is what you need to do. Because any person, company, or invention that you and I deem remarkable was created by people who made the determination to follow through, to decide first and to figure it out later.
That's right.
I want to leave you with something practical, something you can actually do tomorrow. Most of us have a question we ask ourselves when things get hard, when the projects stall, when the results aren't there yet, when the gap between where we are and where we want to be feels too wide. The question is, what if this doesn't work? And that question will stop you every time because he has no good answer. You cannot guarantee it works. No one can. Kennedy couldn't, Armstrong or Hamilton couldn't either. But there is a different question, and it changes everything. What happens if I don't quit? Not will I succeed, not do I have what it takes, just what happens if I stay in it? What gets built? What becomes possible? What version of this exists on the other side of me not walking away? Because the people in this story did not succeed because they knew how it would end. They succeeded because they refused to let the not knowing to be the reason to stop. Kennedy committed before the technology existed. Hamilton wrote that extra safety code before anyone asked her to. Armstrong flew the ship manually with 30 seconds of fuel left. So here's what we want to leave you with. Write this question down. Somewhere you will see it every morning. Not what if it fails. Not what if I'm not ready. Ask yourself, what happens if I don't quit? Let that question become the engine because they did not wait until they knew how. Neither should you.
You know what stays with me? Not the moon landing itself. It's the 400,000 people who never got to stand on that stage, who spent 8 years building something they believe in. Most of them will never have their name in history books. They gave everything and they showed up anyway.
That's what commitment actually looks like. When you strip away the glory, it's not a moment, it's a decision you make over and over without a guarantee, without a finishing line in sight.
I once sat in a car I just had bought in the parking lot because I didn't know how to drive. My stepfather told me to start, so I drove around the complex where we lived. Into one day, I wasn't learning anymore. I was just driving.
We record in a closet late at night after the kids go to sleep. Every morning, I look at my board and I ask, what happens if I don't quit?
That's all it ever is. You start, you ask the right questions, and you refuse to stop.
In 1961, a president made a promise nobody knew how to keep. In 1969, a human being stepped on the moon. 8 years, 400,000 people. One commitment made before anyone knew how. They did not wait until they were ready. The technology didn't exist. The plan didn't exist. The guarantee never came. They committed first, and the commitment became the engine. That is the story of the moon landing. And if you let it, it can be yours too.
Thank you for listening to History I Just Learned. If this episode meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it this week. We'll see you next time.
Bye bye.